So the first Celtic thinker we are going to discuss is Pelagius. He was a British, possibly Welsh, possibly Irish Celt, living in the Roman Empire of Britain during the 4th century. This is before the Anglo-Saxons even existed, so he was likely an indigenous Celt, living in a brief period of Roman occupation in his homeland. He was never ordained in any church that we know of, and despite his being regularly referred to as a monk, he was not part of any religious community. He did, however, practice a clearly ascetic life, one which would be very familiar to monks and nuns today. His Celtic spirit can be plainly distinguished from the predominant North African Christianity of Augustine and the Christianity of Jerusalem led by Jerome. Now, Jerome and Augustine were the leaders of the two most active and important Christian centers in the Roman Empire of the time. Jerome was a prominent leader in Jerusalem, and Augustine was a prominent leader in Hippo, now present-day Algeria. Now, Pelagius's Celtic take on Christianity was at direct odds with the Roman form which Augustine and Jerome taught. When Pelagius arrived in Rome from the British Isles, he was appalled at the morality of Christians living in the heart of the empire. He was appalled at their treatment of the poor, their involvement with wealth and power, and their apparent belief that how we act and conduct our lives is not something that Jesus cares about. Well, for a Celt, living on the edge of known civilization, this take on Christianity made no sense at all. Didn't Jesus tell us to give away our possessions? Didn't Jesus tell us to avoid pomp and circumstance? Didn't Jesus tell us to avoid prideful living? Didn't he explicitly tell us that how we treat the poor is how we treat him? How could this religion of the empire be following the same Jesus Christ that Pelagius knew so well? Well, Pelagius spoke out against the wealth and power he saw, much like Jesus did. And that made him very unpopular with upper-class Roman society for obvious reasons. Well, in this discussion of Pelagius' teachings, we will be primarily utilizing his letter to Demetrias, a noble Roman citizen belonging to one of the most prominent families in the Roman Empire of the time, that being the Venetians. Now, at the tender age of 14, Demetrias had decided to take a vow of celibacy and dedicate her life to Christ. Now, being from a prominent and immensely wealthy Christian family, her mother asked some of the foremost Christian teachers to give Demetrias instruction for her new religious vocation. Augustine, Jerome, Pelagius, and likely Pope Innocent I were all involved in this young woman's religious instruction. Now, Pelagius undoubtedly outdid them all. His letter is eloquent, profound, and humble. It reflects the spiritual maturity which one would hope to find in such a distinguished spiritual leader, which Pelagius was. Many modern Christians would have you believe that Pelagius represented a small splinter group of heretics, when in reality his teaching was highly regarded by a large number of Christians and ecumenical councils from a wide range of geographical locations throughout the Christian world. Now, this is why Augustine and Jerome decided to target him so vehemently, because he was a serious contender in the race for establishing orthodoxy. Well, while Augustine and Jerome assaulted Pelagius' character, he consistently spoke of truth and right living without mention of his opponents. And this is likely, and unfortunately, part of why he lost the battle in the end. As you read through his letter to Demetrias, which I pray you do, notice the way he delicately avoids criticism of his opponents. He chooses to speak for truth instead of against his enemies. If only we could all have that kind of humility. Well, eventually orthodoxy became defined by Augustine's teachings, and that's not all bad. But over the course of our time together, I would like for you to imagine what the church would be like if Pelagius had won the race instead. If the Roman Empire had not intervened and given Augustine the edge he needed to be the victor. Well, let's imagine together what a Christianity that followed in the footsteps of Pelagius instead of Augustine would have looked like. The main thrust of the debate between Pelagius on the one hand and Jerome and Augustine on the other was a question of the role of grace and righteous action in salvation. In short, this was a much more philosophical and in-depth continuation of the debate between Paul and James in the New Testament. We typically call it the faith versus works debate today. While many of you watching this will have been raised to believe that faith is what matters and that works are not important. History has shown, however, that both sides of the argument, from biblical times until today, believe that action is important, even if they don't admit it. Even staunch Protestant churches who hold firmly to Luther's sola fide, or the doctrine of salvation by faith alone, are still debating questions of right action today. Any church which takes a stance on either side of debates like LGBTQ rights, abortion, social services, or other ways that Christians live their lives and conduct themselves is not about whether they have faith in grace. It's about how they act. The cold, hard fact is that everyone thinks that how we live and what we do is important. So the real question, in my mind, is about what actions we are supposed to take. Well, Pelagius spoke against wealth and power, like Jesus did, and so he came under harsh criticism, like Jesus did. And I believe this is the main reason his teaching of human goodness and the ability to live a truly holy life came under such harsh criticism. Anyone with a copy of the Bible can see that Jesus tells us to give away our wealth, to avoid any kind of public praise, and to love all people. So, how do you be a Christian and still be part of the wealthy ruling class? Well, you decide that humans are so inherently wretched that we cannot ever live up to those high ideals which Jesus taught. And that's exactly what happened. The doctrine of original sin became the foundation for the belief that faith is all that matters. And that gave carte blanche permission for Roman aristocrats and businessmen to maintain their social superiority and even twist the church to serve their own purposes. See all of Christian history from the time of Jesus onward for reference. But that's all I'll say about the history of it and the debate of the Pelagian heresy. Moving forward, we're going to be discussing the actual teachings of Pelagius himself. And in the next 3 videos, we'll be taking a closer look at his view on natural human goodness, the debate of faith versus works, and actual daily practices and how we live our life, which he lays out for us. So I hope you feel inclined to take notes, and I strongly encourage you to read the letter through before continuing on with the rest of the talks. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you soon.